Before diving into this incredible story, remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every story has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Chicago was shrouded in morning fog when Captain John Reynolds began his patrol in an affluent residential neighborhood. A white man in his 40s, Reynolds had spent more than 15 years on the force and considered himself untouchable. For him, authority meant imposing his will, and respect meant being feared. For months, rumors had circulated about his racist behavior, but they had never reached his superiors. That morning, as he was getting out of his patrol car with his baton at his belt, his attention was drawn to an elegant black woman walking confidently along the sidewalk. Her impeccable gray suit and leather bag seemed to betray a high social status, but Reynolds saw only a target to intimidate. Without thinking, he stepped towards her and, in an authoritative tone, demanded that she stop. The woman, calm and dignified, slowed down but showed no fear. "Excuse me, madam, can you identify yourself?" Reynolds asked, his voice trembling slightly, but his arrogance remained undiminished. Monique Harris, for that was her name, looked up at him and replied politely but firmly. "May I ask why you are asking me this, officer?" But Reynolds, blinded by his prejudices, couldn't bear the slightest question from her. In his mind, this woman dared to defy his authority simply through her composure and dignity. His face hardened, his muscles tensed, and he felt a rage rising within him, a rage he believed was justified by his role as a police officer. Without warning, he forced her to her knees on the sidewalk, still damp from the night's rain, as passers-by began to gather. He verbally humiliated her, hurling degrading remarks about her skin color and her supposed arrogance. The murmurs from the crowd grew louder, but Reynolds, too proud to notice, still believed his position of power was unassailable. It was then that Monique, motionless and impassive, slowly produced an official badge and showed it to the police officer. The crowd held its breath. For the first time, Reynolds felt a shiver of fear and a profound doubt. This wasn't an ordinary woman he would be intimidating that morning, but a federal judge, the one with the power to hold him accountable. Silence fell, heavy and oppressive. Reynolds' arrogance, which had always protected him, was about to crumble. Fate had just knocked on his door, and he didn't yet know how bitterly he would come to regret it. The air was still thick with humidity and the smell of wet asphalt when John Reynolds began his interrogation of Judge Monique Harris. Passers-by had gathered a few meters away, their phones raised to film what they already sensed would be an unfair confrontation. "You must explain to me why you are walking here without permission," Reynolds growled, his tone oscillating between anger and condescension. Monique remained calm. Her voice, firm but polite, echoed through the street. "Officer, I have not broken any laws. Could you tell me on what basis you are speaking to me like this?" But Reynolds didn't want an answer. He saw only a protest that he had to crush. With a sharp gesture, he tried to force her to kneel on the wet pavement. Passers-by exchanged shocked glances. No one had ever seen a police officer act with such contempt in front of a crowd. "Get on your knees, immediately," he ordered, his hands on his hips, the stick within reach. Monique dodged slightly, her gaze, black as night, piercing him. "You have no right to treat me like this." But Reynolds persisted. In his mind, he saw only a black woman daring to defy authority, and he thought that fear and humiliation would be enough to make her give in. He didn't yet know that his mistake would be fatal to his reputation and career. As the tension mounted, Monique remained motionless, her dignity intact. She knew exactly what she had to do to restore order without endangering herself. In a slow but deliberate gesture, she took out her official judge's badge and showed it to the captain. "I am a federal judge. Your actions are illegal and will be severely punished." Reynolds' arrogant laughter died instantly. His face paled slightly, and he felt an unfamiliar weight in his chest. The power he thought he had was evaporating before his eyes. The crowd, now aware of the situation, murmured and moved closer, some silently applauding Monique, others filming every second. Reynolds finally understood that he had just made a monumental mistake. His authority was crumbling, and his humiliation was only just beginning. The silence in the street had become almost palpable. Passers-by held their breath, some whispering to each other, others filming every moment of what seemed to be a historic clash between authority and justice. John Reynolds felt his arrogance waver, but he wasn't yet ready to admit that he had crossed the line. Badge or no badge? He growled, attempting to regain his authority. You will tell me what you were doing here and comply with my instructions. Monique Harris, standing still and dignified, crossed her arms. Her voice resonated calmly and firmly. Captain Reynolds, you are not speaking to me like a private citizen. I am a federal judge. And you have just committed a flagrant abuse of power. Every word, every gesture you have just made, is being recorded and will be used against you. The captain froze. His laughter, so sure of itself just moments before, died in his throat. He hadn't expected this response. To him, Monique was just a black woman who had dared to challenge his authority, and now she was revealing a truth that could ruin him. Passers-by, realizing the gravity of the situation, began to exclaim. Wait, she's a judge? Oh my God, he's going to be in big trouble. John felt a lump form in his throat. He stammered. You are, what? Monique showed no fear, no trembling. She took her official documents from her satchel and held them up. Each paper bore the federal seal, each word reminding Reynolds of the magnitude of his mistake. You are suspended immediately, and a federal investigation has been opened for abuse of power and racial discrimination. Your conduct will be documented and reviewed by your superiors. For the first time, Reynolds felt panic grip him. His career, his image, his pride, everything seemed to crumble in seconds. The crowd around them murmured, some applauding Monique, others filming to share the scene on social media. Every camera, every phone seemed to capture the precise moment Reynolds's power evaporated. Monique, impassive, observed the captain. Respect is not commanded by fear. It is earned through integrity and justice. You should have known that. Reynolds lowered his eyes, unable to speak. Fear and shame overwhelmed him. For the first time in his life, he understood that his authority, built on fear and racism, was worthless against the law and the dignity of a black woman who refused to submit to injustice. The sun had begun to break through the morning fog, but in the street, the atmosphere remained heavy with tension. John Reynolds, his face ashen, tried to regain his composure, but every glance from passers-by and every camera pointed at him reminded him that he had made a monumental mistake. Monique Harris, still standing, impassive but resolute, made no gesture to show anger. Her mere presence commanded respect. Passers-by, shocked by the scene, murmured among themselves. It's unbelievable, a police officer being humiliated by a judge. We're finally going to see justice done. Reynolds felt his chest tighten. His mind, usually filled with arrogance and certainty, was now flooded with fear and shame. He tried to speak, but the words died in his throat. Everything he had built, all those years of believing himself untouchable, was crumbling before him. Monique slowly approached him, her gaze piercing. Captain Reynolds, you have just crossed all the lines. What you have done is a blatant abuse of power, an act of discrimination. You will answer for your actions before the law and your superiors. Each word resonated like a hammer blow to Reynolds' conscience. The crowd around them began to applaud softly, but with such intensity that each clap seemed to hammer away at his guilt. He understood then that this wasn't just a personal humiliation, he had just lost the respect of his entire community, and publicly at that. In a trembling breath, he murmured. I didn't know. Monique shook her head slightly, without a smile, without an aggressive gesture. You knew exactly what you were doing. That's the saddest part, Captain. You knew, and you chose to do wrong. But justice always catches up with those who abuse their power. Reynolds felt an enormous weight on his shoulders. For the first time, he realized that his arrogance and racism had come at a price, and that price was far higher than he had ever imagined. There were no excuses, no way to escape this moment. The judge, standing before him, represented everything he had despised: dignity, integrity, and justice. As Monique turned back to the crowd, her face remained impassive yet authoritative, and Reynolds understood that his career, his reputation, and his ego were now hanging by a thread. The shame he felt wasn't simply a public humiliation, it was the brutal awakening of his conscience. Sirens wailed in the distance, but not for Reynolds. This time, it was the arrival of higher authorities, there to officially confirm what the crowd already knew. Video of the incident had begun circulating on social media, and the media scandal was growing by the second. John Reynolds, his face etched with shame, stood motionless, unable to utter a word. He had been suspended immediately, and a federal investigation had been launched. Police superiors arrived quickly and invited him to follow them, without confrontation, but with judgmental looks. Monique Harris, standing in the middle of the street, took a deep breath. The crowd surrounded her, respectful and admiring. Her composure, dignity, and courage had transformed a moment of fear and humiliation into a resounding demonstration of justice. She glanced at Reynolds, who was descending the steps of the patrol car with trembling hands. "You have chosen the wrong path, Captain. But know that every abuse of power eventually meets with justice." Passers-by applauded, some even shedding tears of relief and pride. Cameras continued to film, immortalizing the moment when misused power was confronted with truth and the law. In the following weeks, Reynolds was permanently suspended and subjected to a thorough investigation into his past conduct. Several previous complaints were re-evaluated, and he was forced to undergo severe disciplinary procedures. His once arrogant and unpunished reputation was now permanently tarnished. For Monique Harris, this experience strengthened her resolve. She continued to serve as a federal judge, inspiring her community to stand up for their rights and never be intimidated by abusive authority. Her courage had shown everyone that dignity and justice are never for sale and that every act of discrimination will sooner or later be punished. And while the city of Chicago was still talking about this incident, Reynolds, alone in his now empty and silent office, felt an overwhelming weight on his shoulders, the bitter regret of having underestimated the law, justice, and a black woman determined never to be humiliated.